What time is it?
Okay, we have some fabulous live music later on, but right now, here's the kind I prefer.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Shad with West Coast Styles for my November edition of In the News with Douglas Century. This month, we're going to be talking about two noteworthy hip-hop events that happened. One, the tragic passing of Takeoff of Migos and the effect that violence, unfortunately continues to have on the hip-hop community and all the events surrounding that. And then secondly, kind of addressing the generation gap again. Recently, 21 Savage made comments to the effect of that Nas was irrelevant, and understandably that has certainly ruffled some feathers. And so Doug and I wanted to address those two, issues that are currently in the hip hop news.
Thanks for having me, brother. I'm coming from another book event where I was talking about the mob, so I'm a little more different dress than I normally wear my baseball hat and all that.
No, dude, it's all good. I mean, it's a sign of professionalism. I saw some of those pics on social media, some of those pics you sent me. Excellent stuff. Last Boss of Brighton, excuse me. The other book that Doug came out with last summer, in addition to Split Decision. So if you haven't gotten a chance, please check that out as well. Excellent stuff.
So the first point we're talking about Takeoff. I gotta say, you're going to have to school me a bit on Migos. I know they're huge. I know Ice-T, who I respect a lot, was talking about how in a very recent interview I sent you, he was saying they can rap their asses off. So it's not like anybody is saying, oh, this young generation, they don't have the skills.
Their big breakthrough was in 2013 with the song called Versace.
Yeah.
And that's how I first heard of them. But that was after Drake had done a remix of it. And I was like, oh, what's this song that he's remixing? And so then that's how I got introduced to Migos. And yeah, I mean, their album culture is, fantastic. I believe it was the 2017 Grammys, was a best rap album nominee. And then the song that I then knew them from after Versace was their collabo. It was their song, but with Lil Uzi Vert, their Bad and Bougie single.
Yeah, Bad and Bougie I knew very well. And of course, Cardi B and Offset. I mean, I kept following, I'd say, a little bit more of the TMZ news related to them. But then I see, these brothers are in Houston basically celebrating a birthday party. And once again, somebody gets tragically, murdered. Is there a theory behind? I mean, I know they were shooting dice. They were outside of a
bowling alley. There's all of it is speculation at this point. It's my understanding that Cameron was arrested and taken into custody by Houston police last week for a felony charge of unlawful carrying of a weapon.
Right.
So it's an unrelated charge, but he is being asked about Takeoff's shooting. And so obviously that could have more ramifications depending on what's determined as a result of the outcome of those conversations.
My overall take on this is that, I mean, this has been going on for quite a while, at least since the mid-90s, of you go into somebody else's city, especially these cities like Atlanta and Houston, which have an established, and New Orleans, I would say, unlike New York. I mean, LA's got its own gang culture, and New York's got, but it's such a huge city. It seems to me when you go to these regional cities, let's just say, they have big hip hop scenes, but it's kind of like you got to respect certain people, and if you step on the toes of certain people, so I don't know what caused it, but it's like,
I think that's still being determined. It sounds like, based on the reports that I've read, that, again, I don't want to say accident, but I like that he wasn't a target. Like it was, that it was it was a mishap.
Obviously, Biggie and Pac are the big ones, but Big L, there's Scott LaRock. These guys were not killed because of rapping. They're killed because of the like a lot of people are killed in these neighborhoods, or a lot of people are killed in situations where somebody feels disrespected, and it has very little to do with the actual music industry. But when you think about the risks that come to any young man who's going to be hanging out in another city where he maybe doesn't know the guys, doesn't know the lay of the land. I don't mean necessarily beef, but just recognizing, oh, this guy's a bad guy. I mean, I've been in situations in New York where just straps got pulled over nothing. I mean, I think I told you this story about it. I was on this boat cruise and Love Bug Starsky, legendary, and it was just, this was the crew, Alpo and all these guys from Harlem. They were just pissed off that they weren't getting enough shout outs on the microphone, and they pulled guns. And I mean, we're on a boat in the middle of, like, you can't escape on a boat. Everybody was just fleeing. So, I mean, things happen. The level, it's tragic because the music doesn't really, it's not related to the music, it's related to the environment. And unfortunately, to people that don't follow rap, it's just going to be another, hey, well, those rappers, they're always shooting each other. You know what I mean? Like, it can have nothing to do with the music. But every time a hip hop artist is involved in something related to crime, it gives the music.
The whole genre gets stigmatized.
It does. I look at these young guys and go, you got your whole life ahead of you, There is a thing, though. I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but the idea that you go to Houston and you're from Atlanta or vice versa, it's almost like you got to check in with the shot caller. I mean, I've heard this certainly from LA, like when certain people come to LA, they're supposed to check in with certain shot callers to let them know, I'm in town, I don't want any problems. I'm not here to start problems, and there's a kind of code, especially since a lot of these guys in hip hop are rapping about a criminal world. Yeah. If it's the trap, so it's not like you're just,
a tourist.
Yeah. Or, Joe Blow, who works, in the IT department at a tech company. And he's just like, you're coming there. You probably have a lot of jewelry on. We had that situation we were talking about in LA with just coming to a city where you have a lot of crime. You're a target. They don't really care if you're a famous rapper. I think we talked about this in one of our earlier news segments, is that there became a shift in the 90s to guys coming from the neighborhood and then bringing along more or less heavy hitters who were known. Extortion might be part of the terms, or just might be your homeboy from the neighborhood who's got a reputation. Most guys from hip hop, it wasn't a bad thing to necessarily bring a guy that came from your neighborhood. He might be 10 years older than you, but he knows you. You put him on the payroll as security, whatever, but he's a little bit more than security. He's intimidation. So bad guys recognize other bad guys. You usually, this Russian mob thing, I just gave a talk. This mob boss, he told me when he got to Brooklyn, I said, well, how did you know who to fit in with? And he said, we have a saying in Russian, a fisherman can recognize another fisherman from like 1,000 yards, or a wolf can recognize another wolf. So I noticed this happening in the mid 90s into the early 2000s, especially after the deaths of Pac and Biggie. You started to see these kind of more or less gangster guys being around the rappers as an intimidation factor to the other gangsters. So you could necessarily, but there was a guy named Wolf who was with Bad Boy. He got murdered in Atlanta. When you take that to another city, it's not really your turf anymore. Yeah. And I'm not saying any of this has to do with Takeoff, but it sounds like, when you are traveling in another, I don't know, I would have to ask Ice-T's advice about this, but when you're traveling into another city, it's probably a good idea not to hang out too much. I mean, it's one thing, everybody goes, all these guys go to clubs and strip clubs and all that, but 2 a.m, 3 a.m, and you don't really know who all these different players are. And there's clearly a lot of jealousy. I mean, I don't know if he was just hit with the crossfire, but when you're around celebrities, I mean, they're there, there's kind of a vibe. Oh, so-and-so's here. I mean, it's a very, very tricky thing to be young and want to go out and hang out and party and all that. But also to know, you're a target, so, but I mean, for you being of your generation, it's got to almost feel wearying to just be hearing, oh God, we lost another guy.
I mean, they certainly their influence on the culture and their presence in hip hop is certainly felt. Anybody that has their finger on the pulse of what's going on now, and their influence has certainly reached, and impact has reached people and artists that we grew up on. Like, for example, when he passed, I know 50 was doing a show in Finland, and he stopped and had a moment of silence for him. Right before he passed, him and Quavo put out an album called Only Built for Infinity Links. And one of the things that someone had asked Quavo was like, hey, did you guys reach out to Raekwon or, and kind of get his blessing? And he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. We respect the OGs.
That's good. I mean, so I would say that the best that could happen for young rappers and all young entertainers is mentoring and or guidance or advice. They don't necessarily want to hear from the older heads, but the truth is, just listen to some folks that you trust, and get your ass into a controlled. I don't want to say home, a controlled environment.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I agree.
A control, because it's the same. Like it would happen to you and me. I might have a little house party, but it's a lot different if I go to a bar or a nightclub. Anything can come to me where somebody just wants to start shit. Maybe they had a bad day. So I'm assuming what happened to Takeoff is just most likely he wasn't the target, or maybe his brother was the target. Who knows what, or a cousin. But wrong place, wrong time can be fatal, right? Yeah. So we also have to talk about Nas. Like, who said what? Not 21 Savage said something about Nas. What?
Yeah, he said something to the effect. He just said something that Nas wasn't relevant. Well, and I think I disagree with him. This sounds like an oxymoron. I disagree with him, but I understand how he could feel that way, because Nas probably isn't relevant to 15 to 20-year-olds, which is probably 21 Savage's prime demographic.
Yep. Now, I know this from talking to a 21-year-old, and I remember King's Disease. There's 3 of them now, right? So the first one came out.
Yep, there's 3 of them, but then also between King's Disease 2 and King's Disease 3, he came out with an album called Magic.
Okay. Well, in King, it was... He did a remake. EPMD were back in business with Eminem, the original EPMD, and I was just listening to this shit. And I played it. Asked this kid who's 20, who's into 90s hip hop, and he said, fuck, nobody gives a fuck about Nas. This was like 2021, last year maybe. Nobody gives a fuck about Nas. And I said, what do you mean? Like, nobody cares. Like, nobody's listening to him. That's what he said. So I get what this guy is saying. I get 21 Savage is saying, he's not important to my demographic. They don't care about him. Not one of the greatest MCs of all time. So if I hear somebody saying he's not relevant, maybe it's a bad choice of words. Maybe he means, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say he means he's not being listened to avidly by my fan base. Maybe that's what he meant. But
yeah, I did some more research on it too, because I mean, everybody has his comments on it, and just kind of on the heels of, and I know we talked about it in a previous episode, just academics, about calling older MCs or older people in the culture dusty. It's just that generation gap. And I think it was Jim Jones. He said it kind of just like what we're saying is like people aren't even allowed to have opinions anymore. Like, and I know when you and I first I brought this up, or we started talking about it, I said, that's the thing. Like, he's entitled to his opinion. In that sense, he has every right to say that. I think he could have chosen his words differently, and he could have, explained himself a little bit more, because there's always room for interpretation. But I mean, if that's the way he feels, that's the way he feels.
Of course.
And
I mean, hip hop has become such a broad tent, a big tent, that you've got everything from highly lyrical, highly, complex storytelling to just banger, club music.
I think to give 21 Savage the benefit of the doubt too, again, I don't agree with him, but I think too, hip hop is at an age for the first time ever. And again, I don't think there was some like watershed moment when this was declared, but hip hop was seen as a fad for decades, and then it was just like this young. So this is like the first time in the history of the culture in the last maybe decade or so when you've kind of been able to have 2 or 3 generations of hip hop existing together, because at one point there only was 10 years of history.
Yeah, there was one generation.
20 years of history, and inevitably that stuff was going to overlap. One time I was interviewing Jazzy Jeff, and I asked him like, hey, do you think parents understand now, or just some play on his classic record with the Fresh Prince, and he's like, they certainly understand better because they're hip hop fans.
100%.
Like, kind of just like what you were telling me about what Ice-T had said about like corporate America and people that run these companies now that are 40 and 50s, like they grew up on hip hop.
I said that again in that same all hip hop. He's like, dude, there's been a shifting of the guard. We're dealing with CEOs who are 38 to 45. They're not afraid of us. They grew up with us.
So what are your final thoughts on relevancy?
I mean, it's a tricky thing because I'm going to give you, my perspective. I think we talked about this before, even in like rock and roll, which hip hop has kind of supplanted rock and roll. But, when the Clash came out, so that was in the 77, 78, and they had a song, Phony. This was on London Calling. Phony Beatlemania has bitten the dust. So they're dissing the Beatles, and you're like, huh? But it was like, we're this new kind of music, and fuck all that overproduced technical guitar playing. We're just gonna thrash our guitars and fuck. I mean, now I look back and go, well, the Beatles are an awesome band, the Clash are an awesome band. But I think that sense of generational rivalry, saying, okay, I'm young, you're old, and I'm here to replace you. It must kind of hurt the older. I mean, honestly, I think for the guys who laid this foundation, that's why, LL kind of took it personally with academics and said, look, man, these guys are the reason you have a career.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see young people understanding it that way. They are more likely to be like, I don't like listening to your music. It's shit. Like, I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't see how somebody can listen to Illmatic, the album with Ether on it. Fuck. Stillmatic. I mean, dude, Nas is just an all-time great.
Yeah.
Jay-Z is really unusual in that he has somehow managed to sound relevant. I don't think anybody thinks he's not relevant, and he's over 50, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how he's done it. Like, he's very unique. I don't think many people are looking at too many other rappers of his generation and saying, oh yeah, man, like I heard Jay-Z's verse on this. Yeah. No, I don't, but by the same token, people of my generation are not really, like, even real hip hop fans are not really checking 21 Savage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, that's the next one. I think it's a two-way street.
But when you say
hip hop is a youth, a young man's game, a young person's game. And so I think as far as, strength in numbers, as far as streams, social media presence, and all of that, and kind of what counts in today's market, I wouldn't be surprised if 21 Savage's numbers surpass Nas's.
Oh, of course. It's a bit unique to hip hop because there's so much bravado, and part of the, I mean, maybe this would be my parting statement on this. It's true. For 10 years, and I was there. I wasn't there for the beginning of hip hop, but I was in New York in '89. So it still was a relatively, and people kept calling it a fad. But I don't really know any young people now that hate hip hop, but I had a lot of my peers, I'm talking in my mid to late 20s, who just hated it. And if I said why, they would just say, it's all this bragging and ego. Can people stop with this ego shit? Well, that's just the way rap is. Like, sorry, man. It's about, I'm better than you. Fuck you.
Something that makes hip hop unique.
It is. And it comes out of the dozens. It comes out of, just, I'm going to put you down. Rock and roll didn't really have that as much. It really wasn't. So for a lot of people who are my age, when they first heard hip hop, they couldn't get over like I had friends who were like, it's so narcissistic. Everything's, I'm this, I'm the, like, yeah, but that's the style. My closing thought on 21 Savage to say, Nas is not relevant. Either you're talking shit to get clicks or do your history. That's it. Like, just go back and listen, and you will hear something there that you will take away, whether it's, New York State of Mind. Fuck, there's so many Nas records that just blow my brains out. We were talking about this too. How many young people even know who Cool G Rap is?
Yeah.
And the guy
album coming out in December too.
But fuck, man, Cool G Rap. You put me onto a Mafia album Cool G Rap did that I hadn't even heard of. I mean, because the guy was like, there's people in hip hop who are kind of slightly under the radar influential, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows who Biggie and Pac, Jay-Z, even maybe Rakim. But then there's these people, like, you just sit there and go, Brand Nubian, Tribe Called Quest, like, and they had a huge impact on the culture. And Cool G Rap is...
Yeah, well, I just think it's one of those things, like, what they may lack in commercial success, they make up for in influence. Cool G Rap might not have a diamond album, but you better believe that he influenced every rapper that does. Like,
You're right. And it's sad that, guys like that are not going to get the kudos that they deserve, because that type of rap is not what people really are listening to, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning highly lyrical, highly storytelling, role.
Did you ever hear the song that Nas did with Cool G Rap did with Nas?
No.
Oh, dude, I'm gonna send you that link. Oh my gosh. Because off Cool G Rap's album 456 called Fast Life.
Oh, you're right. I have it. No, I have it. So, okay. So to wrap up this segment, somebody says somebody's not relevant. That's an opinion. Mm-hmm. They're entitled to it. And it may be accurate in terms of streams, clicks, fan base.
It may be accurate in a certain context.
Right. But again, I
have different metrics.
Right. And I would parse the word and say, does relevant mean popular among my fan base? Yeah. And if that's the case, no, there's probably in a Venn diagram a tiny number of fans who are 21 Savage fans and Nas fans. Yeah. Very, very few. Very few. But that doesn't mean Nas is not relevant.
Exactly.
He's relevant to the culture.
What time is it? Okay, we have some fabulous live music later on, but right now, here's the kind I prefer.